Boleh kita mulai, Bu, Bapak?
Siap semuanya.
Wartawannya sudah siap ya?
Are all the journalists ready? The team ready?
Colleagues attending in person and virtually, good evening from Jakarta, Indonesia. Thank you for joining us today at the press conference for the Indonesian ASEAN Chairmanship 2023, the 10th ASEAN Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting and related meeting. I'm Febrio Kacaribu. I will be moderating this press conference. We are honored to have with us the co-chairs of the meeting, Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, the Indonesian Minister of Finance, and His Excellency Bapak Peri Warjio, the Governor of Bank of Indonesia. In the next 30 minutes, Excellencies, first will deliver address. Following their remarks, the floor will be open for questions. These questions will be addressed during the Q&A sessions that follows. First, I would like to proceed by inviting Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati to take the floor, please.
Terima kasih Pak Febrio, thank you so much. Good evening to all our colleague media. Thank you for joining us in our media briefing today. As you all know that we have just finished conducting the 10th ASEAN Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor meeting, or we call it the AFMGM, in which Pak Peri and I hosting and chairing the meeting together today. You all recall that last March, in March 2023, we have the first ASEAN Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor meeting. The first ASEAN Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor meeting now reconvene here in Jakarta. This is the first time for the chairmanship of Indonesia to invite the meeting of Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor twice within 1 year. So the meeting for our second meeting this year is to discuss the progress of our finance cooperation agenda, and especially also to update us with so many development in the global and regional economy, which is becoming so dynamic. The agenda for our second meeting is the 3 strategic objectives, covering the first is the recovery and rebuilding, the second one on a digital economy, and the third one on a sustainability. The timing of this meeting is very, very important. This is also to show the solidarity and to solidify the ASEAN position as an important regional entity. This message of the regional cooperation is becoming so important, particularly in light of the current global dynamic and challenges. As presented by the international financial institution, including ADB, IMF, World Bank, as well as the AMRO, ASEAN economic growth continue to be a bright spot in the global economy. ASEAN was projected to grow at 4.5% this year, higher than the global growth. Of course, composition for each country will be different. On the inflation side, it is expected to remain high in select ASEAN member states, but it remains comparatively lower than other regions. ASEAN has managed to maintain the increase of its interest rate and the depreciation of its regional currency despite the escalation of global interest rate. These economic fundamentals underscore ASEAN resilience toward global headwinds, continuing its path to be the epicentrum of growth. In today's discussion, the ASEAN Finance and Central Bank Governor is discussing how ASEAN can strategically keep this momentum and resiliency continue and collectively navigate the ongoing challenges. This include intensifying geopolitical tension, increased debt pressures, and limited policy spaces, facing with the global fragmentation, slower global trade growth, and a threat from the advancement of technology as well as concern regarding food and energy security and climate change risk. Our meeting today emphasizing the importance of strengthening ASEAN macroeconomic policy mix to enable the ASEAN member state to use all the available tools to ensure the stability of our economy. The meeting also stressed the importance of well-coordinated policy action to address this multifaceted risk. For this year's chairmanship, Indonesia marks the effort made by the ASEAN finance process to enhance collaboration with other sectoral bodies within the ASEAN Forum. This initiative in the form of joint ministerial meeting is essential in addressing emerging global and regional common challenges in a more concerted effort through cross-sectoral approach. Because we can actually now see that any issue cannot be addressed by only single ministers. And that's why we also initiate a cross-sectoral meeting. We discussed two expanded agenda for the cross-sectoral collaborations, namely the finance and health collaboration, and on discussing related to the food security. On the finance health collaboration, the first ever joint meeting between finance ministers and health ministers of the ASEAN was successfully conducted yesterday. And this is also sets the step for continued cooperation and progress in the ASEAN region health and pandemic prevention, preparedness and response in the Southeast Asia as reported by the study which is conducted by the Asian Development Bank, ADB, and the potential to mobilize financing modality in the ASEAN region, including by utilizing COVID-19 and other public health emergency and emerging disease ASEAN Response Fund. On the food security, we discussed the progress of our commitment to enhance finance sector involvement to ensure the regional and global food securities through strengthening collaboration between ASEAN finance process and other ASEAN sectoral bodies. This cross-sectoral collaboration, which is beyond finance, have the objective first to improve policy to reduce challenges to food security, and the second one to enhance availability and affordability of healthy diets, and the third one to improve financing access for medium and small medium enterprise, small farmers to support food security, and the last one is to enhance trade facilitation to drive food security. In order to support the achievement of our sustainable long-term growth in the ASEAN region, the ASEAN Finance Minister and Central Bank Governors discuss on how ASEAN can increase its infrastructure financing through repositioning the existing ASEAN Infrastructure Fund, AIF, as an ASEAN Green Fund. The objective is to promote sustainable infrastructure in the ASEAN region. In this regard, the meeting agreed that we need to align ASEAN Infrastructure Fund financing with the ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance. We also agreed to strengthen ASEAN Infrastructure Fund's business processes and conduct further studies on the ASEAN Infrastructure Recapitalization contribution and also optimizing of the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund existing capital. During our meeting, the ASEAN Finance Minister and Central Bank Governors also highlighted the importance of promoting transition finance to support the achievement of low carbon economy in the ASEAN region. We are all fully aware that climate change is a real threat and we need to respond accordingly. Financing transition has become one of the most critical issues. The meeting also discussed the ASEAN Taxonomy Sustainable Finance version 2 that serve as an example of how ASEAN members are working to enable a just, affordable, and orderly transition in the ASEAN region. The ASEAN taxonomy is the first taxonomy in the world that classifies energy transition as a new green classification. This taxonomy is an essential instrument to attract private investment to support transition in the region. Therefore, the ASEAN Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor underscore the importance of interoperability of the ASEAN taxonomy with other international taxonomy. In this meeting, we invited also from the EU, who's also already developing their taxonomy. Aligned with our effort to address current pressing challenges, we, the ASEAN Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor, continue the regular discussion on our common interests. The discussion on a tax and custom cooperation to improve the implementation of exchange of information, accelerating the completion and implementation of the agreed standard procedure and guideline, and also to increase our capacity to keep up with the current threat and issues. On the issue of disaster risk financing, we focus on enhancing member capacity to assess the risk, to explore financing instruments, and to develop more effective financing strategy in responding to the disaster risk. We also have an update on the progress on the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2025. We evaluate our progress, challenges, and achievement, and we also will move to post-2025 ASEAN Economic Community Vision. We exchange ideas to accelerate and improve the implementation of the blueprint, and we want it to be robust as well as remain relevant with the current global development and dynamic. So these are all the area which cover mainly also jointly with Pak Peri on the Bank Indonesia. Pak Peri will add more specifically on the area within the Bank Indonesia review. Pak Peri.
Thank you, Minister Sri Mulyani, my friend of media. I will add the following 5 points of the achievement, concrete achievement in the area of central bank. Number 1, the meeting, the finance minister and central bank governor meeting agree the need for strengthening the macroeconomic policy mix to better withstand the global spillover, to ensure the ASEAN continue on the path of economic recovery with macroeconomic and financial system stability. During the Indonesian ASEAN chairmanship in 2023, the policy mix has been increasingly recognized and understood and being implemented in ASEAN as important policy framework to implement, especially in the current juncture of global challenges and uncertainty. In this regard, Indonesia is one of the leading example for implementing macroeconomic policy mix. What we mean by macroeconomic policy mix? One, which is strengthening the policy coordination between government fiscal policy and monetary of the central bank. And this is where Indonesia, the close coordination between fiscal and monetary, one of the backbone ensuring Indonesia continue on the path recovery as well as maintain stability. The second element of the macro policy mix within the central bank, whereas monetary policy of the central bank not only confined through interest rate policy, but being complemented by exchange rate stability as well as capital flows management. The third element of macroeconomic policy mix is the use of macroprudential policy to ensure financing to the economy continue flowing and supporting economic recovery and be also coordinated between macroprudential and fiscal policy. This is where Indonesia under Financial System Stability Committee has been coordinated. In this juncture, the macroeconomic policy mix being understood, implemented, and recognized. In this context, ASEAN has also invited the IMF and the BIS to work with ASEAN member countries to better understand the regional context while at the same time increasing implementation of the macroeconomic policy not only within ASEAN but also as a reference for other countries in the international in the world. In this aspect, the IMF Integrated Policy Framework, BIS Macro, Financial and Stability Framework will be integrated, will be jointly working together as macroeconomic policy mix that we implement in ASEAN. The effort to mainstream this policy mix is done through various platforms such as discussion in the working committee, meeting, side event, including also the recent high-level policy dialogue on macroeconomic policy mix hosted by Bank Indonesia and Bank of Thailand in August 22, 2023. Number two, expansion of the ASEAN local currency transaction framework. In the May 2023 ASEAN Summit, the leaders already endorsed and instructed to expand the use of local currency transaction. And this is the effort then being agreed by finance minister and central government to expand local currency transaction in the three areas. Local currency transaction for facilitating trade and investment. And second area, local currency transaction in the area of cross-border payment system. And the third area, local currency transaction for financial asset. This is the expansion of local currency transaction framework in the area with that. Then in the future, transaction in the region can be done through local currency. From bilateral local currency within the ASEAN member through multilateralism in the ASEAN country, with that will strengthen the resilience, the ability of the region to withstand the global spillover especially from the advanced country. We hope that there will be also expansion. Today, we signed memorandum of understanding between Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia to expand local currency transaction in these three areas, and we are looking forward for other member ASEAN to join signing and implementing local currency transaction. This will also further promote stability in both macroeconomic financial system and to address global spillover to ensure region to continue on the path of recovery. Number 3, expansion of regional payment connectivity within the ASEAN region. Following last year's success of signing 5-member ASEAN on July or G20, this year regional payment connectivity being expanded following the May 2023 ASEAN Summit. In this aspect, the deliverable, one of the deliverables is ASEAN Leader Declaration on Advancing Regional Payment Connectivity. This commitment will help facilitate seamless and secure cross-border payment. In this context, ASEAN member countries have agreed on the regional payment connectivity roadmap, which outline the timeline for ASEAN member joining the regional payment connectivity. In this roadmap, today, Vietnam already joining the other 5 members, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore, and the Philippines to follow connectivity in cross-border, especially in the QR, fast payment, and other regions. And we are looking forward for other member countries, including Brunei and others, to join regional payment connectivity. Number 4, which is strengthening digital financial inclusion and literacy within the ASEAN. ASEAN has completed the implementation guideline to strengthen digital financial literacy in ASEAN, which aim to provide action-oriented guidance for policymakers in the ASEAN and will complement existing guidance in the ASEAN and global financial inclusion agenda. In addition, under Indonesia ASEAN chairmanship, also conducted Digital Financial Inclusion Festival, DFI, which is on the sideline of the 10th AFMGM in August 2023, just in the International Conference Center. The DFI, Digital Financial Inclusion Festival, and the endorsement of the implementation guideline to strengthen digital financial literacy in ASEAN aims to enhance financial inclusion and empower individuals in the realm of the digital finance. 5, and last one, revisiting the working committee mandates. Indonesia chairmanship initiate deliberation to strengthen ASEAN finance process to enable ASEAN to respond to the dynamic global economic landscape. In that regard, we have just endorsed the establishment of the task force on revisiting working committee mandates. For in the initial state, the task force was formed to develop the guiding principle needed by its working group to be able to revisit working committee mandates in the alignment with the ASEAN Economic Community 2025 and beyond. This is the 5 deliverable achievement in the central bank area. I give back.
Thank you so much, Minister and Pak Gubernur. We will collect the first 3 questions. The first round will be in English. So if you want to ask the questions in English, please. Nada, anybody else? Okay. What's your name? Please state your name, and then we have 2. Okay. Go ahead with the first, Aditya. Okay. Go 3 questions, Nada, and you and Aditya. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nada from the Jakarta Globe. I would like to ask Mr. Perry regarding the regional payment connectivity. You said that the other member states will join the regional payment connectivity. Can you give a specific timeline on perhaps when the other member states such as Brunei, Darussalam will join this initiative? And also, Bank Indonesia has just launched the trial run for the QR code connectivity with Singapore? And when will you be planning to launch the trial run with the Philippines? Thank you.
Okay, next. Please state your name and your media.
Hi, I'm Claire from Bloomberg. I just wanted to ask, how would you assess the risk of spillover now with the potential Fed further rate hikes and the China slowdown? And do you see enough safety nets within ASEAN and maybe a need to increase the Chiang Mai Initiative contributions?
Okay, thank you. Very succinct. Aditya, please.
Yeah. Hey, my name is Aditya from the Jakarta Post. Maybe to Bu Ani, you mentioned in the opening that there is a comment or maybe the mentioning of deglobalizations is more mentioned right now by many policymakers and also economists. And you also said that the ASEAN is want to keep this momentum of good economic growth and navigate challenges. What is the concrete maybe policy or gesture from the meeting that can be shared today? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those 3 questions. We will start with Pak Gubernur, please.
Thank you very much. The regional payment connectivity, the end goal will be all of the ASEAN members countries. The timeline will depend on one, the preparedness of each of member country to have regulatory authority of their domestic payment system. Number 1. Number 2, also the readiness of the industry, domestic industry in the respective country to agree on the QR code and other national standard. So last year we already started with the 5. Because the 5 countries, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines, all of the 5 already have the authority to regulate and supervise domestic payment system industry. And the implementation, of course, progressing. We already done Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. Singapore also done with Thailand and Malaysia. And Indonesia and piloting with the Singapore. And hopefully end of this year will complete it. So the 4 countries by the end of this year will be interconnected each other. From bilateral to multilateral of the 4 countries. Philippines already have the regulatory and supervisory authority. And the Philippines in the process of consolidating their industry, talking with their industry to agree on the QR to be connected with the other 5 countries. So the Philippines in the process of their talking with the domestic industry. Now, Vietnam already joining because Vietnam already have the authority to regulate their domestic payment system. And they will also talking with their industry to agree on their national QR. This is the Vietnam. That's why Vietnam is joining. Brunei is in the process to have a regulation in their countries that Brunei Darussalam monetary authorities will have the authority to oversee and regulate their domestic payment system. And we talking with them, we will helping them to set up their regulatory framework, and later on we will help them to also ensuring their domestic industry will agree on their QR and the fast payment. This will be on progressing, and the other member will also, joining later. 3 areas. 1, of course, the readiness of each member country have the authority on their domestic payment system. 2nd, the readiness with the industry to agree on the national standard. 3rd, the readiness to join, to connect with they already connected. I hope I answer the question. Question number 2, please. Number 2, please be talking the ASEAN. The response to Fed fund rate, please remember, not always confine the interest rate. I repeat again, the response of the central bank in the region to mitigate to increasing Fed fund rate, not always only through interest rate. This is why the central bank policy international policy makes matter. That's why we talking to the IMF to understand and looking into integrated policy framework. In the ASEAN members, the response, one, of course, the interest rate. Second, through exchange rate stability. Third, to capital flows management, as well as also the reserve adequacy. By doing this, ASEAN Central Bank are better in withstand those global spillover. And we do not see any merit to go beyond that, including also the need to revisit the Chiang Mai initiative. This is why the ASEAN finance minister and central government agree to strengthen the capability, the practice of central bank policy, including in the monetary policy, do not confine interest rate, but being complemented by exchange rate stability, capital flows management, and macro-prudential policy. With that, I hope I answered the question of number 2.
Please, Bu Menteri.
Thank you. The question how we actually, as an ASEAN, as a group, try to navigate and maintaining our resiliency, that is really the core of the discussion that we are having on the first 2 sessions, and that's why we inviting the IMF, World Bank, as well as the AMRO, ADB, in providing what is the nature of the risk. I think it is already identified that first, the tightening of the liquidity, interest rate increase, inflation although lower, but is still relatively higher comparing to the pre-pandemic level, and potential global both growth and trade that is going to weaken. The discussion providing from all these international organizations the direction of policy, part of it is already mentioned by Pak Peri, that we have to make sure that the policy mix at the macro level, the stability can be maintained within the ASEAN member countries. So fiscal monetary policy, making sure that the stability at the macro level, that means on the fiscal direction, monetary direction need to be synchronized, agreeing and responding to this changing global environment of weak growth, tightening liquidity, higher interest rate, and some capital outflow that translated into currency pressure. The second one, we have to also make sure that the financial stability is there. And the assessment from the AMRO and others showing that the financial robustness and stability within the ASEAN is actually quite proven, but we should not taking for granted. So that's why the policymaker, that is finance minister and central bank governor, need to look at all the potential vulnerability on the financial sector. The third one is on a trade and an investment policy. We see that the geopolitical situation and the competition between United States and China can provide also an opportunity on the investment, because there is a capital outflow, but also capital inflow in terms of the FDI, in which both the United States bloc or the European bloc and the China in this case, seeing ASEAN as one of the region that can potentially become the relocation of their investment. This is ASEAN and India is two region that is being seen as potential benefiting from this kind of situation. So within that context, the policymaker, like finance minister and central bank governor, we need to continue for Indonesia. Certainly, we've already discussed since pandemic, and today the recovery is not as easy and as smooth for the global environment. So we need to continue discussing and synchronizing our policy. You can see that within the Indonesia, every time we discuss about a government budget, Bank Indonesia is always present, whether in the cabinet or in the parliament. Pak Perry in this case and I in continue in a regular discussion and exchange note, because that's very important. Many countries is facing some of the very severe trade-off. Indonesia, alhamdulillah, is relatively in a good position, but we have to be continue vigilant. The second one is making sure that Indonesia will use all the instrument tools to create the strong ecosystem. This is also recommended by both the AMRO, ADB, World Bank, on strengthening the trade and investment. In Bank Indonesia is emphasizing, Pak Perry, on stabilization and how to make sure that we are continue robust on a trade and investment policy, making sure that we are going to be able to capitalizing this momentum of growth. And within ASEAN, we should be also collaborate, but sometimes we also compete, but competition in a healthy way. This is also very important for the ASEAN, and it's good for us to discuss about this kind of policy mix as well as the structural policy. The third one, we have to make sure that the structural problem need to be addressed, and in this, that's why in the discussion that we are having, infrastructure and transition is actually a structural issue. This will create bigger source of growth, but financing is gonna be very tricky. And that's why finance minister and central bank governor discussing about how the ASEAN can actually mobilize the infrastructure financing, whether within the region or even attracting from outside the region. So we discuss about policy, instrument, mechanism, or using the existing tools. This will provide the source of growth when the environment regionally and globally is actually weak. So that's maybe that we could respond to your question.
On Chiang Mai initiative, any
Chiang Mai
comment?
initiative is already
mentioned by Pak Gubernur.
Yes, I already answered.
Yeah. Alright. Bu Menteri, Pak Gubernur, izin kalau boleh pakai bahasa Indonesia untuk yang series berikutnya.
Madam Minister, Sir Governor, let's use English for the next session. We have Aziz, Agnes, and I'm sorry, what's your name, ma'am? Yen? All right, we have 3 questions. Aziz, you can go first. I have 2 questions, actually. I'm Aziz from Katadata. First to Mr. Perry. Following up on the Jakarta Globe question, on whether there were concerns during the meeting that the 10 ASEAN countries would not be able to realize this connectivity due to the Myanmar issue. Is the Myanmar issue a challenge in the connectivity of the region? Second, to Madam Minister, has there been any discussion on the slowing of China's economy and the impact on ASEAN countries with regard to the slowing of the Chinese economy? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Agnes from Harian Kompas. I also have 2 questions. First, with regard to financing infrastructure. If we take a look at the post-pandemic situation, the fiscal situation and the funding from ASEAN countries have become increasingly limited. With regard to the repositioning of AIF, what is the direction of the contributions, perhaps from MDBs or blended financing, or what you mentioned earlier about taking on more financing or investment from outside the region? What kind of schemes would be involved? With respect to the impact of the collaboration in the financial sector, what is its impact on our bargaining position and our economic position? We have LCT to reduce our dependence on the American dollar. So how can we reduce our dependence on this infrastructure that has been highly dependent on China? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Minister said that there was an exchange of data on customs payments and taxes. Can you explain this further? And in this meeting, did you also discuss international taxes such as the global minimum tax? Thank you. All right, Madam Minister or Mr. Governor, who would like to go first? I'll go first. All right. So, Andinda, The RPC has already been signed by all of the ASEAN members. Everyone has already agreed. So the question is, how is the preparedness of each country? It's different, right? So even though we've agreed through this MOU, now it's about the implementation, where it will be aligned with the preparedness. So it has nothing to do with Myanmar or not, but it's about the preparedness of each of these countries, as I mentioned earlier, whether that country has the authority to regulate and supervise companies and services in each of their countries. If they don't have the authority to do that, then of course they wouldn't be able to connect with other countries, right? Each of the countries need to establish the authority to do this, the powers to do this, and then they can agree. Second, does the country have the ability to consolidate the industry? So do these industries agree? Because we need to ensure that each country has their own QRs, right? They need to have their own QRs for their payments. If they don't manage that, then they won't be able to manage their own QR and connect it with the CRIS. And then the third issue is the implementation. We start with piloting and then we go on with the implementation. So, Adinda, this is a matter of implementation. We've already managed this with 4 countries. And at the end of this year, we have Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia. We have multilateral between 4 countries. We're all interconnected. And then we'll have the Philippines joining, and Vietnam will also be joining for the implementation. And then Brunei will join when it is ready based on its preparedness. So it's all in stages, gradually, and the implementation will lead to a reality where all of the countries are connected in their fast payments with local currencies being used. For the question of whether there was any discussion on the slowing of the economy, specifically with respect to China, all of the international reviews state that the conditions, both on a global level, including the United States, Europe, and China, with the economic developments in these countries, of course, they will affect the economic conditions. So we have a growth projection for this year and next year. For this year, it's revised, it's actually increased according to IMF. And this is because the economic growth of the US is more resilient. However, next year, there still remains a certain risk, which is a downside risk. So it's higher for longer. And for China, this is slowing. So this is what we say is the regional and global environment, which will affect ASEAN. What is the impact on ASEAN? Of course, this will affect the exports. In this region, we export to the United States, to Europe, and also to China. There's also the factor of whether this tension will result in fragmentation. Therefore, the focus of the presentation was how ASEAN could create the resilience that would be, as what I answered earlier to Aditya from Jakarta Post. The question earlier was the focus on structural policy, the focus on intra-connectivity within ASEAN, and a focus on infrastructure financing, specifically green financing, transition financing, and how we can improve the connectivity of services within ASEAN. That's why Mr. Perry mentioned payment systems and using the local currency. This is very relevant. These are the themes that, on the one hand, will create a greater resilience in ASEAN, in the global landscape. And in addition to that, from the World Bank, AMRO, and ARIA, we've shown that the opportunity with respect to geopolitical competitiveness is actually favoring us with regard to the reallocation of manufacturing to this region, technology, and how we can position ASEAN as an area that is competitive and attractive. With respect to infrastructure, as I said, infrastructure in ASEAN requires approximately 280 billion per year. And this is not a need that can be met with the existing resources, both public and private. So as a result of that, we continue to face an infrastructure gap in financing. This is about 9 billion every year. So we see that there's a financial gap here and a transition financing gap. So our discourse has been focused on how we can try to attract capital from outside the region. And one that is considered powerful is creating an ASEAN taxonomy. What this would do is to clearly define in a credible manner what the transition economy is, what projects would be classified as green projects or consistent with the transition to just, affordable, and simultaneously orderly, so that it does not cause disruption. We also need to provide certainty with respect to the accusations of greenwashing. At the same time, we need to acknowledge that transition isn't easy. It's not simply as easy as snapping your fingers. There are many regulations that need to be communicated. And what was discussed in great length was that we cannot simply make a taxonomy for Indonesia or ASEAN or Singapore. We need to make a taxonomy that is interoperable between the ASEAN economy and the rest. This means that once we can operate this and there is interoperability, then financing can be confident about entering the ASEAN region. This is a pillar that is crucial in generating financing, specifically for infrastructure and financing transition toward a low-carbon economy. We have a lot of homework in this respect, but as mentioned earlier, ASEAN is among the most advanced regionally to address the issues of climate financing and infrastructure financing. This is in terms of the regulation and the foundation. If we take a look at development banks such as ADB and the World Bank, they can offer many things. First of all, they can help improve blended finance, and they are positioned as institutions that can reduce the risk. Because if a project is deemed to be high risk, then of course they will require higher charges, higher interest rate. Meanwhile, we are facing some very high interest rates in the world today. That's why the role of MDBs is to de-risk, to reduce the risk of projects or programs in a country. We also need to create blended finance that is scalable. Blended finance at this time is more project by project based. For project A, for transition, okay, we have this. We have blended finance from philanthropy, it's going to be this much. From MDB, it's this much. From public finance, it's this much. From the private sector, it's this much. And that's for one project. It's not something that can be replicated and upscaled to other projects. Meanwhile, as I mentioned earlier, we need about 280 billion per year. This is a huge amount of money. So perhaps we're able to achieve blended financing for one project, but it's not able to overcome these huge problems on a larger scale. So as mentioned earlier, we're not simply talking about financing and its relation to China. We see that there's a lot of liquidity. However, they require assurances and acceptable risks. That is why we need to attract them. For the exchange of tax and customs data, I think that for tax and customs, we have AEOE, which we've discussed together, to be able to be improved, where we can make it more intensified and we can have more predictable and timely access to information. there are inevitably going to be many things that we can improve in the mechanism. For example, with customs, if we have an ASEAN economic community, next year the host will be Laos, and Laos is a landlocked country. If we talk about customs in Laos, it's a dry port. So we don't have seaports in Laos. So we need to ensure that we have a flow of data, and people and goods can move more quickly without compromising safety and security. So ensuring safety and security includes includes restricting the trafficking of illegal goods as well as the trafficking of humans. So these are the focus of customs and taxation. This is the access of information that we're looking at to ensure that we don't have an erosion of knowledge. We need to ensure that we have the taxes that Indonesia is entitled to. We want to ensure that we're not taking taxes that other people are entitled to, and that no one is taking taxes that we are entitled to. So here at the same time, we are coordinating the taxes between the different countries, and we're working together, collaborating. This is the focus in taxation and customs collaboration. This is something that has been going on for quite some time. At the official meeting at the Director General level and the technical level has proceeded quite regularly and well. We haven't discussed the global taxation policy, although this may be discussed at the deputy level, because we are updating on the G20 situation where we're addressing global taxation issues. However, this is not the focus. This was not the focus of today's discussion or that of March last year. I think that's all. All right, thank you. It's almost Maghrib. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance here. ASEAN will continue to be an epicentrum of growth. This is something that we've proven, and we are going to maintain it. Thank you, and thank you to our friends in the press. Good evening.
Terima kasih, Bu.